you have lived experience of complex mental health. Can you let me know more about that sector or that identity, please?
So complex mental health is a term that I'm trying to push out more and more and more, because it moves on beyond the mental illness, person with lived experience of mental illness or mental health challenges or mental health issues. So complex mental health, it's more of a dignified way of saying a person with mental illness, because what it does is it embraces the whole complexities of what mental health means to someone. So that means housing, financial, social connections, and all the things that go into someone's mental health, as well as having something like schizophrenia or bipolar and complex trauma. So it's the whole picture.
Great. Yes, I'm part of that too, so it's all good.
Yeah.
You and I go way back, Heidi, to when I first really started working here with Philip Hoytson-Roeder back in 2004, I think I met you. And my, oh my, hasn't it been a trip since then?
You know, Elon Musk, if I can mention his name, is creating rocket ships to go to the moon and Mars and space and live out there. People like you, Eva, you're creating rocket ships in society, and you know, the stuff that you've been doing since I've known you in 2004, my goodness, you know, you've created a rocket ship, and I've watched you launch it many times over in many different ways, and so it's an honour to know you too. But yeah, I think it was Club Wild back in the day with Wild at Heart and Phil Hoytson-Roeder, and I think, you know, he's an important part of both of our stories.
Yes.
So yeah, rocket ships around.
So let me know what you mentioned to me before about older women identifying later in life as autistic within the mental health
system
game.
Yeah, so I've been in the public mental health system since I was about 17, and I'm in my mid-50s now, so that's a long time, and that involves in and out of psychiatric wards, hospitals, welfare services, mental health services. But one thing I'm really noticing in the last 5 years in particular is this new thing where women over 50s are identifying as autistic because their kids are being diagnosed as autistic, and it's much more seen in the community that women and girls can be autistic. I think one of the latest reports from the NDIA about the demographic of kids under 12 being diagnosed autistic, it's like 48% or something, but only 6% of those are girls. So we're still seeing a whole 40% of girls who are going to end up in a crisis mode, you know, an ongoing complex trauma mode, because they're not being acknowledged as being autistic as young kids. And so what happens for people like me is in the 70s and 80s, when we were young girls, not being identified but being actually punished for our disability. So, you know, when I was a young girl, I was made to sit at a cupboard in the side of the classroom, so I was not disrupting the class from their learning. So, you know, and it just got worse from there basically. So I ended up in a psych ward at, you know, in my early 20s, diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. But what happens with that split from women who go on and generally have functioning lives, one way or another, get married, have kids, and then diagnose themselves or get diagnosed as autistic, there's this whole other demographic of the same age that ended up on the streets or in the justice system or in psychiatric units. And it's only now where there's actually, they come up to me, like, because I do a lot of work in mental health communities, and you know, women of a certain age, over 50s, will come up and say, Heidi, I think I might be autistic. And I'm like, yay, good for you, you know, celebrate it. But then I see other women in their 50s out, you know, in careers and mortgages, and they say, oh, I'm autistic and my kids are autistic and I'm going to wear a t-shirt and I'm going to go to a support group. So for me, my whole curiosity is why the split that happened for one group to go on and be, relatively functioning, and I mean that in a relative state. And then this other group that end up in prison systems and welfare systems and on the streets and psych wards. What happened in that, in the late 70s or 80s that sent me one way and my friend the other way?
Yes.
So I'm really curious to explore this lost women generation in public systems like justice systems and whatnot, where women are really timidly saying, I think I'm autistic, but I also got diagnosed with schizophrenia. Can I be one or the other? And I'm like, actually, perhaps the schizophrenia is the complex trauma of dealing with the fallout of being autistic as a young person.
Being denied.
So yeah, I'm really curious to explore that more and more and more. So I'm making a little film documentary about it called Lost Women.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so if you know anyone.
No, that's great. I was just thinking about your example before when you were talking about your primary school life. My primary school life, every lunchtime I was picking up papers. Every lunchtime I was picking up papers because I spoke too much and I put my hand up too much in class. Every day, picking up papers. That's primary school for me. Is picking up papers.
Yeah, we could write a podcast called Picking Up Papers.
Yeah, we could. We could indeed.
My first job was picking up papers,
and I wasn't paid. Guess what? Voluntary work already started before I was 10 years old. Damn it! So you spoke about older women identifying as autistic within the psych system. How do they, I recognise what you're saying about some women like wearing it like a badge, and often these women have been diagnosed later in life, but I think they've gotten to a place of privilege already before they get bestowed with autism, and they can wear it as a badge of honour, whereas people like you and I maybe, who have struggled throughout life, being diagnosed with autism just seems like yet another load, yet another burden to carry. Would you agree with that?
I think for some people that's definitely true. Whereas for me, I was called autistic when I was a kid once or twice, and on the streets once or twice, and once I was referred to as autistic in a psych ward because I couldn't come out of my room to eat my food. I had to have everything perfect. And I got special privileges in a public psych ward to stay in my room to eat my food, which is a huge thing in a public system. But then, a psychiatrist, I was talking to a consultant one day and I said, I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia and I've had that label for 30 years and I've suffered immensely from medical coercion and treatments for that diagnosis. And the pills keep me alive and the counselling keeps me alive. But at some point, I need to decide whether publicly I'm going to identify as schizophrenic or autistic. And this very senior psychiatrist said to me, schizophrenia trumps autism. You now have schizophrenia, you can drop the autism diagnosis. And so I did.
Yeah.
And so for 20 years I never mentioned it to anyone because I thought, well, schizophrenia trumps autism. And then I started to do all this work in community and doing my own research, my own street research. And schizophrenia and autism are pretty much the same things in childhood. Like it used to be called childhood schizophrenia. And then, autism is cured at 18 miraculously. I don't know how, but apparently when you turn 18, you don't have autism anymore. That's a joke. So, they're very interchangeable. And I think the only thing that they really know that's different between an autistic person and someone with schizophrenia is that a person with schizophrenia will often more report hearing voices or hallucinating or a psychosis that has no grounding in logic or something. That's the only difference. Whereas the actual personality of schizophrenia and autism are very interchangeable. Whereas I know and my peers know now that schizophrenia is a complex trauma reaction.
So complex trauma. Is it appropriate for me to ask what your complex trauma was?
So everyone sort of knows what PTSD is. So post-traumatic stress is when you've been through something like a flood or a fire or a war or a famine or, you know, some crime of some sort, and it's one thing that happens once, twice or three times, and there's other people that are witness to that and part of that. So up to that point, nothing really bad's happened, and then you have this disaster or this crisis, and then you end up with trauma from that. And, you know, we all know what PTSD sounds like, but complex trauma is a brain development situation for children from the ages of around 0 to 20. So the brain never gets to develop the skills to cope or feel happy or safe, because that young person has been in multiple situations with caregivers where they felt their life is in danger. So it's different caregivers in different scenarios, all impacting on that kid's brain to think, I'm not safe here with this adult. I'm not safe with this adult. I'm not safe with this adult. And so your brain never gets to develop safety mechanisms like dopamine and serotonin and the cortisol level that just sits at a peak for 20 years because you're constantly trying to stay alive and find survival techniques. That's complex trauma. So it involves the environment, it involves people, it involves patterns, and it's only you. And you're not telling anyone, and no one sees you.
I've got all these little ching-chings going off in my head right now.
And complex mental health, when you shift that to another degree and you say complex mental health, it includes things like ableism, racism, generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, autism for deaf people trying to fit in a hearing world. You know, it's complex. It's not complicated. It just means that the matrix of all interconnecting parts is quite complex.
Multifaceted.
Beautiful. Yeah. And everything sort of bumps around with other things.
Tell me what's great about art and the experience of complex
you're speaking
mental health.
my language. All right, the arts. So art, my goodness. So you and I met through music, I think, through Club Wild.
Yes.
Up to the point of me teaching myself to sing, I barely said 3 words in public. I had a really rich dialogue going on in my head and in my spirit space, but what came out of my mouth was not much, unless it was anger and meltdowns, like rah. Apart from that, so I got into music and songwriting and singing, and that gave me a voice, and it made me use my voice, and my language developed, and off I went. So if it wasn't for the guitar teaching me how to sing, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you like I am now. And no psychologist, no psychiatrist, no psychiatric medication, no psych wards have got that skill that a guitar has.
Yes.
Wow, you know, so I know the power of the arts. Now I run Schizzy Inc. and I started that in 2008, I think. It's a performing arts organisation. Based on that, how does music enable someone who doesn't want to or can't or won't speak, you know, blah, 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 a voice? You know, sing about it, dance it out, perform it, act it, mime it, do a joke about it, tell us a funny story about, you know, your worst food in a psychiatric unit. I don't know, tell us a funny story about it, or, you know, do some spoken slam words. Are you using different parts of your brain? I know that I live in my right brain because I feel it moving.
You feel your brain moving?
Yeah, I feel it, and especially this bit here. So if anybody out there is watching and can feed back what this part of your brain is, I'll be very curious because I can feel it.
That's where I got my majority of my damage from after my accident.
So can you feel it?
Not really.
Not really.
No, I'm not quite as in touch with my brain. I was more in touch with. I used to, in the first decade after the injury, I had a conscious awareness of super Eva. So super Eva was not of this world, but Super Eva was there to guide, like kindly guide me. So yeah, I had an awareness of being two beings at the same time.
Do you know where that was? Like, could you identify where it was around you? That Super Eva?
Well, it's also another thing is that you were speaking about how people with complex trauma are always on alert. I don't sleep. So last night I've been awake since 1:30 a.m. I've been kind of lying, I've been resting, but I don't sleep at night.
So how does your brain switch off for a minute to let things file?
I usually get maybe 2 or 3 hours sleep at the beginning, and then I'm awake from the middle of the night and onwards.
So do you feel like your files, all your tabs are open all the time?
I always say that I'm like a Filodex. Remember Filodexes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like the Filodex is me, and I'm skimming through the cards to see which one I'm going to activate at that point in time.
And do you know generally where they are?
Filodexes?
Yeah, like where you need, like you go, oh, there it is.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, I could be feeling a bit manic or something like that as well, you know, because we're all neurodivergent, and we all display different aspects of being human, and isn't that wonderful?
Well, neurodiverse, I love it. I love the neurodivergent label and whatever context you want to put that in, but it's kind of also it's the neurodivergent irony that you're stating the obvious to us, but honestly, if we weren't neurodivergent, we'd all be ants operating as a hive, as one hive, like
cohesion. Imagine,
yes, or a flock of birds or something. So we are all diversely neurotic. So it's kind of like stating the opposite, which is a bit of a joke. Like, it's a funny in-joke for neurodiverse people to say I'm neurodivergent. It's like stating the obvious to us.
Yes.
But it makes people who don't think like that uncomfortable, because it's like, well, you're different, are you? Oh.
This is why I'm doing this show. This show is all about showing people there's nothing to be afraid about. That we're not scary.
So can I ask you, is there a mental health reality around ABI and TBI? Like, is there connected mental health things that come up? Like, obviously trauma.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where the brain was damaged. It also depends on the type of person that you were before the injury. I know for me, I have lived most of the past 2, nearly 3 decades in regret, and I've really had to work on. Thankfully, I work with a psychologist who works with EMDR, which is eye movement, and she's been able to remove a lot of the trauma that keeps me awake and keeps me traumatized.
So how do you place like your disability? Because there's two types, like I'm trying to get across it, there's 2 types of mental illness. There's the mental illness that's chemical based, biological based. Yes, I'm manic all the time, and I have bipolar, and I have to take a medication to keep that mania low. But then there's also complex mental health where it's influenced by your environment and social attitudes and expectations and stereotypical profiles that you need to play.
Yep.
So that's what I would be curious about when you have a brain injury. Like, obviously people might feel quite depressed, and that's totally normal to say, well, I'm now a different person, and I need time to adjust to that. But then is there also a mental health reality that's influenced by the environment?
Of course, absolutely. Because the one thing that you've always got in your head is that you've always got a comparison. This is the way I was treated back then. This is the way that I'm treated now. This is what I was paid back then. This is what I'm not paid now.
Okay.
Right? And wage and value is something that is really, really close to my heart. Because I am still as valuable as I was before the injury. In fact, I'm more valuable now, and yet I'm still not recognised as that because of the society that we live in. And yes, especially
I mean, you could have a whole
treatment over the last few years has really been awful. and it's taken me a very long time to be able to raise my head, and I'm very, very grateful to our friend off the camera here who's helped me out with this and giving me an identity again, because that's what you lose after a brain injury. Your personality doesn't change, your identity changes, and therefore you have to go through a whole system or a whole process of rejigging your identity. Do you have anything else to say about the arts and the experience?
I think they just evoke some amazing conversations that don't happen anywhere else. So like the conversation we've just had was prompted from talking about the arts. And I think people who say the arts are just a hobby and let's have fun, let's go to a painting class or a dance class and just experience the dopamine and the connection. It's completely erasing the experience that you and I might have, or disabled or deaf people or people of diverse cultures would have around the arts. It's not the arts when you've got lived experience. It's your language, it's your economy, it's your voice, and it's your story above all. But it's that thing, there was a beautiful saying that I saw once, and it was, when you tell your story, you're giving someone else a key to unlock their own prison. Because the beautiful thing in the arts is when you say I, everyone is hearing or seeing the word I, and so they're hearing or seeing the word I in themselves too. So if you say I'm hungry, you're now hearing that as you're hungry. So that's what the arts do. It enables people to be in their own story while they're witnessing other people's story. And unless we do that, we're just doing pothole management of roads and, railway development and big builds and whatnot. We're not people, we're ants. So we've got to go back to we're actually mammals, and mammals need warmth, we need nurturing, we need that connection, and we need to learn from each other. So I think, that's what the arts is. It's a beautiful ecosystem of life, of all its complexities, of all its pain and its glory and its triumphs, rather than just be this monotone vision of humanity. Like the arts take us in different frequencies and space and time, and let us look backwards while we're looking forwards, and look up and look down, so.
I'd like you to tell everybody about Skitsy Inc.
Okay, I love that you can say Skitsy Inc. and not Shitty Inc. or Shitsy or Schnitzel Inc.
Skitsy Inc. I know exactly what it means.
That means that you've said the word schizophrenia before. Yay.
Yes.
So Skitsy Inc. I don't know how long I've got to tell this story, but many, many years ago when I started Skitsy Inc., I was umming and ahhing with the late, great Donna Williams, the Australian autism advocate of the, oh goodness, she's passed away now, but she was ahead of her time up there with Temple Grandin. And I said, I want to start this thing where, we do live music and performance and celebrate lived experience, pride and culture, but I don't want it to be all mental health service. And she had a band at the time called Donna and the Aspinauts. And she says, well, if you want to do anything in this country to make it, relatable, you shorten the word and chuck a Y on the end. And I was like, schizophrenia, skitsy, done, sold. G'day matey, how you going matey? We shorten and chuck a Y on there. So that's how Skitsy Inc. came about, but got this beautiful just run of doors that opened, or I built the door and opened it myself, to have the live music event for World Schizophrenia Day. And then that turned into theatre, and then comedy, and then writing, and then visual arts, and then cabaret, spoken word, and now with this year-round program, we've got an art studio at Abbotsford Convent for visual artists and writers to have residencies to practice their work. We've got a performing arts collective at Ross House, good old Ross House in the city. We've got a program in Bendigo for people with lived experience to get creative up there. We've got a healing farm on the go. Where we're so we're going to get a property in regional Victoria where people can come and work with animals and the land and, you know, work as a farmer for a day or a week. But you've got to be that rogue, you've got to be that renegade to be able to do that, and I am that renegade.
You're a wonderful renegade.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You are you open the dictionary to renegade, it's got a picture of little Heidi there. Well done to everything you've done. Well done, Heidi. You're amazing. And you're an author too. Your book,
My Friend Fox.
My Friend Fox.
Thank you. By Ultimo Press.
Yes. I have a copy of it at home.
Yes, and you can find my music on Spotify and Bandcamp and YouTube Music. Heidi Everett. Please, if you Google me, please put .au at the end, because there are 4 Heidi Everetts in Melbourne. And although I do a lot, there's a few things I won't do. So if you Google me, it's heidieverett.com.au, but mostly Google Schizzy Inc.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming in so much to share just a tiny bit of the brilliance that is you, Heidi.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the crew as well, and thanks for watching.
That's all for this week. If you want to get in touch, send us an email. We'll see you next week.